I'm Bryan Roth. I'm professor of pharmacology at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill School of Medicine. I actually played with a chemistry set when I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade. So this was back in the era when people would sell Christmas cards door to door. And if you sold enough Christmas cards, then you could basically order something out of this catalog. And so I did it, and I ordered a chemistry set. And then we basically used it to, kill plants in the backyard, that sort of thing. So just sort of playing with chemicals. On a more serious note, actually, when I was probably 5 or 6, my mother had schizophrenia, and that really had a huge impact on my life and was basically the thing that drove me to get into the sort of research that I do right now. So there are basically 2 main areas of research in my lab right now. The first is, obviously, since I'm a psychiatrist and specialized for many years in the treatment of schizophrenia, we'd really like to understand how those medications work at the most fundamental level. And we're using that information to try to design basically safer and more effective medications. And the other side is we study medications or drugs that are called psychedelics. So drugs like LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, salvia. So in a sense, we study drugs that make people sane and drugs that make people crazy. And the idea is if we can find some commonalities and differences in their actions, that ultimately this will help us to come up with safer and more effective medications for psychiatric diseases. The idea that's held commonly by scientists that study drugs like LSD is that since these drugs have this profound effect on the way people perceive reality and profoundly affect our consciousness, that if we understood how those drugs work, we might understand very fundamental things about human awareness and consciousness. And if you think about anything that is central to neuroscience or human existence, it's awareness. And these are drugs that profoundly affect how people perceive reality. So it's my contention, if we understand how these drugs work, that will tell us something very fundamental about the human condition from a neuroscience perspective. The idea that studying these drugs may ultimately lead to better treatments for neuropsychiatric disorders is an idea that's a bit more controversial. So if we go and look at the history of drugs like LSD, when it was first developed or discovered in the 1950s, the idea among many psychiatrists was that LSD would induce a model psychosis or schizophrenia-like condition, and that if we could develop drugs that blocked the effect of LSD, they ultimately might be useful in treating schizophrenia. That actually turned out to be true. So it turns out the most effective medications that we have today for treating schizophrenia are very effective at blocking the effects of LSD. On the other hand, drugs like LSD haven't really given us any insight into the condition of schizophrenia. So I would say it's not entirely clear that these drugs will give us insight into disease, but they have led to the creation of safer and more effective medications. Basically, looking for drugs that block their effect turns out to be a very effective way for making medications that work in people.